Alright. Hello, my name is Christopher Fish, and this is gonna be my Unit 2 application assignment. So, what's up, Jared? Unless you're not the one grading this, I'll go over to what I'm gonna be doing. So, for my introduction, I'm just gonna be telling you what I'm gonna do. So, for prompt 1, I'm just gonna do what the assignment said on here, to describe and summarize Phyllis Wheatley, and go over her life. And then how describe her to other people. Discussing the symposium, not the symposium, but the poetry, the Harvard colloquial with Dr. Henry Lewis and Dr. Peter Galson, and then discuss. I'll discuss why she's not more known, or why she's not known. Explore, and then go over the whole poem that we went over. And then I chose prompt 3, poetry in the White House, because as I was going through all the topics, I got that one was going to be the coolest one. So going over that one, it's how did why did they choose it, and why is it important for American culture and all that regard? And then how these poems shed light on American culture. And then finally is what did I learn, and what did I like, and what didn't I like, and just all about the poems for each one. So starting from the beginning on prompt 1, describing and summarizing. I didn't realize Phyllis Wheatley even existed before this. Reading it, going through all the prompts, I wrote down a whole page just of her history, which was pretty wild. And just going over is she got kidnapped, or I guess during those times, yeah, she was pretty much kidnapped from her home country, or if it was the country back then, of Singala, Africa. I think it was Singala or Ghana, one of the two. We found that out in the first one. It was the poet enslaved enlightenment is how we found that. And then the whole Phyllis Wheatley, her name was named after the ship that she was taken from. But then she got adopted by if I can find their names, by John Wheatley, because they took the names after their owners from back then, and they taught her English, they taught her how to write. And then she was just a genius for her age. She led the transformation, led the 3 different movements, at least from the Great African American clip that was shown. It talked about how she started 3 movements: the American poetic tradition, the Black literary tradition, and women literary tradition. And mostly from her fame, she was able to get her own freedom, even though later on in life it didn't. She ended up becoming a poor and destitute, but at the time she was super famous because she was completely against what the logic was at the time, since at the time they talked about during the moving on to discuss the whole central figures founding the country itself on American literature. It's just in the colloquium, whatever, the Harvard colloquium, they were talking about how at the time the wide theory was that whites and blacks were separated by each one was at the top of they had us completely separated into two different evolution chains, and African Americans were at the top of the animal food chain, and we were up top of the human food chain or whatever. But Phyllis Wheatley completely shut that one down, because their whole thought process is the reason why blacks are not human is because they didn't have their own philosophy or poems and all that stuff. They couldn't do that. But here was Phyllis Wheatley, who got in the same one, the Harvard colloquium, was they said 14 distinguished gentlemen proved that she was the one who wrote these pieces, that because she wrote these pieces, it like completely shut down that theory, because like how would she be able to do that? Which is pretty wild at the time, or at least at the like high society level. It's just something that never saw before. Why do I think she's not more widely known or studied? I think it's just more because she's like one of those case studies, like at that time in history, like she's a first in a lot of things, but she wasn't able to like really branch out like completely. Like she was like a world superstar, or at least in like the Western world. But it's just, at least from what we learned in like the videos of the other options from the Harvard Collective one, and then Poetry Foundation, it's just like later on they just didn't really. They felt like she was kind of whitewashed, and only after a couple of years later was she able to actually break free and all that kind of stuff. Explore and evaluate, finally read. Oh, her poem? It took me a couple of reads. Like, I wasn't able to really figure out. Like, I think the wording was just a little weird for me. But I kind of liked how she used her ability to be like expansion on high from time to bed now, and like aurora rise. She just used a lot of colorful language, and that might have just made it really hard for me to understand. And then just the language from back then, it's just describing it. What like the one thing I didn't really like is I really had a hard time understanding what the poem was about. What I did like was like just like the different type of language and like how she used it. It took me like a bunch of times just to figure out what was happening. For prompt 3, I went over to president discussions. Got 14 pages. And I went through each administration, and I kind of noticed like the poetry. Maybe it's because like there have been more evidence in here, more options. But what it looked like is later on, like the closer we got to the where we are now in time, the more instances of poetry being used by politicians to like promote a message. Other times it was kind of just like in like their own like little their own like White House events up to like the Obama administration, where they would just bring people in to the White House. But moving on to like later on, like Trump and then Biden. Biden used his in his inauguration, in the hill we climb, and we're about like he was using it as like a way to bring America together. Because I guess for that whole election, we were worried about us being separated and divided. But going through, how did they frame the functions of poetry and the importance of poetry as it relates to American culture? It seems like so Clinton, Bush, and Obama kind of used it as like they were like trying to bring people in to like learn about these types of poetries and like how they, like what was happening. Like for the Clinton administration, featured arts, like his was all about like featuring the arts, histories, and the sciences that like emphasized American furthering of those fields from his multiple millennium events, the American favorite poems. And then the Bush symposiums, they tried, I think they only held one event where they were trying to like bring up the Harlem Renaissance, but I guess it got canceled because of protesting and just couldn't have it going on. And then the Obama administration, they had the Evenings of Poetry of 09 and 11. Both events showcased poetry and how it affected the lives of Americans through the past and now. And like it was more about inclusivity, like bringing more people in to do the poems and stuff. President Trump had like, for the weirdest one, like they started out with President Trump talking about his, let's see, the state banquet of 2019, like, and Trump's remarks. He was at the Japanese summit along those lines, and he was using a poem as a way to say thank you for his visit and meeting the emperor and the empress, which was really wild. I thought, like, I didn't expect that from President Trump, but Then he goes on to use another artist's poem, The Snake, in two of his rallies, and like using it in a different way to promote his message, which was like, I guess that's how art just seems to work out sometimes. How did these poets and poets shed light on American culture? I think it showed like how varied and wide the poetry can be, and how it can be used in different contexts. Like The Snake, I think in the context of the real offer before he died, and his family was the one who wanted Trump to stop using it, was like how it kind of showed like how people were afraid of unknown things. Kind of the same video, like The Hill We Climb, is like at the time we were feeling really pulled apart when we needed to be starting to be pulled together, because it's like that. And just all the other poetry was just all random, and like the art history and sciences was pretty cool because it kind of explored everything. What did I learn? What did you like? What didn't you like? I think I already talked about it. I kind of learned that like each administration kind of had a different approach to their poetry, but I kind of liked how like the earlier administrations that they had up there were more like in-house, while the later ones with Trump and Biden were more like trying to spread the message along their whole platform. What didn't you like? I didn't. It was weird. The early administrations, their poetry was harder to read. It was more along the lines of like in the embedded thing. There was no videos. Like I think the first videos was in the Obama administration, and there's all the videos. But I can understand the Clinton administration, but the Bush administration, I guess the internet just wasn't caught up enough, and they just didn't have it saved. Yeah. And for my conclusion, it's just like how these compare to each other. It's just like I chose them both because of America. Phyllis Wheatley's just like I watched a video earlier, and I was kind of surprised at how much it was in common. It was knowing better, the neo-slavery, about like the history of like, we thought history like slavery ended after Civil War and Reconstruction, but the last slave wasn't freed till technically, and like, that's completely off topic, so I'm gonna end that one there. But yeah, Phyllis Wheatley is an icon that needs to get more light put onto her. She made the first steps in like black literature and women literature, so she definitely needs more light on her. And then the presidentials, it's nice to see that the arts were appreciated throughout the president. All right, have a good one.